"Please," the first girl whispered. "Don't tell them we're hiding here." The faint plea echoed through the frigid space. Sawyer Whitlock, the old carpenter, froze, staring at the two identical faces trembling inside the rusty shipping container. In the midst of the blizzard, he had no idea who these children were, or the they feared, but he knew his answer would determine everything. "First things first, you two need to get warm. Come with me," he said, shrugging off his own heavy coat and wrapping it around both of them. They watched him with uncertainty for a moment. Then, one small hand, and then the other, reached out for his calloused one, clinging to it like their only anchor in the world. Back in his log cabin, the wood stove roared to life, its warmth beginning to thaw the chill from the air. Sawyer set mugs of hot cocoa on the table, while the two girls, now in dry clothes, huddled close together under a quilt. "What are your names?" he asked gently. "I'm Junie," the bolder of the two said. "And that's Lyra. We're twins, 9.5. He offered a small smile. "That's very precise." Junie nodded. "Our mom always said numbers are important." "And where is your mom now?" Junie's gaze dropped to the floor. "She's gone. Our Aunt Carla was supposed to take care of us, but she said if we cried one more time, she'd leave us in the woods." Sawyer swallowed hard. The past had a cruel way of finding its echo. He stood and walked down the hall, tapping softly on a closed door. "Maisie," he called. "Are you in there, honey?" No answer. Maisie hadn't spoken in almost 2 years, not since the day she'd been carried out of the high school auditorium after collapsing on stage. The teasing, the whispers, the glare of the stage lights, it had all culminated in a diagnosis of selective mutism. She'd become a ghost in her own home, communicating only through glances and gestures. But tonight, that silence was broken by a melody. In the living room, Lyra was humming softly as she sipped her cocoa. Then Junie joined in, their quiet voices weaving a soft, two-part harmony like an old melody, finding its other half after years of being lost. From down the hall, a door creaked open. Maisie appeared, barefoot in an oversized flannel shirt, her eyes locked on the twins. She didn't speak, but she stood there and listened. Sawyer froze, watching his daughter with a quiet sense of awe. This was the girl who hadn't been able to look a stranger in the eye for months, and yet here she was, her own eyes glistening as if she were seeing not just two girls, but a memory, a longing. Junie offered her a small smile. "Hi, you can sit with us, if you want." Maisie didn't move, but she didn't retreat either. She just leaned against the door frame, tilting her head as if trying to recall the notes to a song she had long since forgotten how to sing. That night, after the two girls had fallen asleep on the pull-out couch, Sawyer sat alone in the kitchen, a cup of coffee untouched before him. He stared at the wooden box on the shelf across from him. Inside were the last recordings his wife had made with Maisie before she passed away. Lullabies, faint giggles, whispered harmonies. They hadn't been played in 2 years, just like the piano in the corner, just like the man who once believed music could save a person. The next morning, Maisie was already at the kitchen table when he walked in with 2 mugs of cocoa. "Are you okay if they stay for a little while?" he asked. Maisie didn't answer, but when her fingers tightened slightly around her mug, Sawyer knew it was a yes. He nodded. "Good. I think they need it," he added. "And maybe we do, too." Junie and Lyra woke with smiles, bringing a vibrant energy into the kitchen. They helped clear the table without being asked, their giggles echoing at the quirky antics of the old toaster. In stark contrast to the lively chatter stood the still shadow of Maisie. Lyra was the first to notice her and waved. "We saved the red plate for you. It's the one without any chips." A moment's hesitation, and then Maisie reached out, taking the plate with a quiet deliberation before sitting down. Sawyer stood frozen, his heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. 3 girls around a table. There were no words between them, but there was a deeper kind of communication, the language of family, of acceptance, of a morning so ordinary it felt extraordinary. After dinner, the twins began to hum again, A low, improvised tune, the kind of melody children create when they feel safe. Maisie stood nearby, watching. Something in her posture had shifted, her shoulders relaxed, her head tilted slightly, like a flower leaning toward the light. And then it happened. Not a word, but a single, fragile note escaped Maisie's lips. The sound was almost inaudible, but in the silent kitchen, it was unmistakable. Sawyer's hands, deep in the dishwater, went still. He turned, his gaze cautious, not daring to speak for fear of shattering the moment. But Junie did. Her eyes widened, not with shock, but with delight. "You're singing," she whispered, her voice gentle. It was that very encouragement that seemed to jolt Maisie from her trance. She blinked, a look of panic on her face as if she'd done something forbidden, then turned and fled. Sawyer found her in the garage, curled up in the back seat of the old car, a place thick with dusty memories. "You don't have to be afraid of your voice, Maisie," he said, sitting beside her, his own voice low and warm. "Not here." A long silence stretched between them. "I wasn't scared," she whispered, her voice as thin and fragile as a spider's thread. I forgot I could." Music had returned to the house. In the days that followed, Junie and Lyra's voices became part of the landscape, and in the space between their melodies, Sawyer watched Maisie slowly begin to blossom. That night, an impulse led Sawyer up to the attic. Dust motes danced in the air as he opened the old guitar case, revealing the honey-colored wood he hadn't touched in over a decade. When he turned, Maisie was standing in the doorway, her eyes wide. "Do you remember it?" he asked, softly. She just nodded, stepping silently into the room. Sawyer sat down, his calloused fingers slowly finding their way back to the frets. The old wood groaned in protest, but when he finally strummed a chord, the sound that rang out was warm and full. "I was thinking, maybe we could try again," he said, his eyes fixed on the guitar. "Not for a performance, just for us." Maisie stepped closer. She looked down at the gently vibrating strings, then whispered, her voice firmer than he'd ever heard it. "Okay." As the fire in the hearth faded to glowing embers, Sawyer began to play the simple chords of an old lullaby. Maisie listened, and then, as quietly as falling snow, she joined in. From the hallway, Junie and Lyra were drawn back by the sound, tiptoeing in to sit on the floor, humming along. 4 voices, 1 guitar. Nothing was planned, yet everything was in perfect harmony. One Thursday evening, as Sawyer was tuning his guitar, Junie looked up from her sketchbook and asked, "Do you think we could sing at Maisie's school talent show?" Lyra glanced up, her eyes wide. "You mean, like at school, on a stage?" "Yeah," Junie said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "We already have 3 songs. The one Maisie started the other night. It's a good one." Maisie's fingers tightened around her cocoa mug, her lips pressing into a thin line. Sawyer set his guitar down slowly. "I'm not sure that's a good idea." "Why not?" Junie asked. "We're not scared." The idea of the talent show, so exciting in Junie's voice, felt like an iceberg drifting into Sawyer's chest. His fear wasn't for the public, but for Maisie. He was terrified that the stage lights would once again awaken the monster that had stolen his daughter's voice. Am I pushing her right back to the place where she broke? He looked at the 3 waiting faces, radiant with an innocence that had never been shattered. And that was the problem. He knew all too well how cruel the world could be. "Listen," he said, his voice more serious than usual. "School talent shows, they aren't that simple. There will be people who laugh when they don't understand something. And that kind of laughter," he looked directly at them, "it can hurt more than any silence ever could." But Junie didn't back down. "Well, maybe it's time someone gave them something they'd have to understand." Junie's words were like a small, defiant flame, carrying a flicker of hope. Looking at Junie's determination, Maisie whispered, "Okay." On the night of the talent show, the town's old auditorium felt even more ancient. For Junie, Lyra, and Maisie, standing in the wings, it wasn't just a gymnasium with stage lights. It was a mountain. From their spot, the girls anxiously peeked through a tear in the curtain, their eyes finding Sawyer in the front row. Beside them, taped to the wall, was a hastily typed performance list. Their name wasn't even on it, just a scribbled pencil entry at the very bottom. Hassan 4, the unnamed trio. Just as the tension reached its peak, the familiar, cruel whispers began to find their way to Maisie's ears. "Look, it's Maisie," a girl's voice hissed, followed by a snicker. "Trying again. Hope she doesn't pass out on stage this time." Each word was a needle piercing an old scar. Maisie's world narrowed, the surrounding noise faded, and all that remained was the low hum of panic in her ears. Then came the final blow. A woman, probably another contestant's mother, said to her neighbor, just loud enough for them to hear, "Good heavens, is that child really going to sing?" I remember the incident last time like it was yesterday. Maisie's shoulders slumped, her breath catching in her throat. The fortress they had so carefully built together felt like it was about to crumble. But this time, Junie took a step forward, positioning herself in front of Maisie, her eyes sharp as daggers as she glanced at the group of girls. At the same time, Lyra grabbed Maisie's hand, which had started to tremble, and squeezed it, as if trying to pour all of her own courage into her. The fear didn't vanish, but it was now surrounded by an unyielding friendship. While the girls faced the venomous taunts backstage, Sawyer was fighting a crisis of his own on the other side of the stage. His heart sank to the floor as the stage manager shook his head grimly. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sawyer. The piano has a badly stuck key. There's no way to fix it in time." A cold panic surged through Sawyer's chest. He had bet everything on tonight, on the safety of a well-rehearsed plan. He glanced at the silent piano, then toward the wings, feeling the weight of 3 small worlds resting on his shoulders. But despair wasn't an option. His eyes landed on the guitar case leaning against the wall. He hurried over to the girls, forcing a reassuring smile as he saw their tense faces. "There's been a slight change of plans," he said, his voice as calm as he could manage. "But it's okay. This isn't a setback. This is an evolution." He held up the guitar. "We're using this." For Junie and Lyra, it was just a change. But for Maisie, it was a seismic shock. The flicker of trust that had just returned to her eyes was extinguished. The plan, her shield, had just been shattered. She took an involuntary step back, wrapping her arms around herself as the shadow of her silence began to creep back over her. Just then, the MC's voice boomed through the speakers. "And up next, act number 14. The MC's voice was like a starting gun. A choked sob escaped Maisie's throat, the sound of something breaking inside. She took a step back, then another, her back hitting the cold brick wall. Her eyes were wild, darting around for a non-existent escape route, like a cornered animal. That single moment triggered Sawyer's most primal instinct. All thoughts of music, of healing, vanished. Only one thing remained: protection. "Maisie, honey," he whispered, his own voice cracking with desperation. "It's okay. I'm here. Look at me." He took her by the shoulders, trying to pull her back from the abyss. "We don't have to do this. We can go home, right now." He glanced at Junie and Lyra, their innocent eyes now mirroring his own alarm. "Let's go," he said, reaching with his other hand to pull his daughter away from this place, away from all of it, before the darkness swallowed her whole. And then, another sound cut through the chaos. Not the MC, not the crowd's murmur, but a voice, clear, soft, and completely unafraid. It was Junie. She took a step forward, stood beside Maisie, and began to sing. She wasn't looking at the audience, or at Sawyer. Her eyes were locked on Maisie. A second later, Lyra moved to the other side, her voice joining in, weaving a gentle harmony, a fortress of sound around their breaking friend. Their singing wasn't a performance, it was an antidote. It was a reminder of nights by the fire, of chipped cocoa mugs, of the bond they had forged together. Sawyer froze, his hand hovering in midair, stunned. Slowly, the sound pierced through the fog of Maisie's panic. Her unfocused eyes began to find their center. She looked at Junie, then at Lyra. She saw them singing to her, for her, a deep, shuddering breath. Then another, steadier one. She said nothing, but she straightened her shoulders. Her gaze shifted toward the stage, and for the first time that night, it wasn't fear, it was acceptance. Junie and Lyra's voices faded to a close. Their song had done its work. No one said a word. Maisie simply turned and walked toward the stage curtain. Sawyer, still in a daze, scrambled for his guitar and followed, no longer a leader, but a silent guardian. Together, they stepped into the light. The auditorium fell silent, a hush, thick with curiosity and doubt. Maisie stood before the microphone. She closed her eyes, not to hide, but to find the fortress of sound her friends had just built for her. And then she sang. Her voice wasn't loud. It wasn't technically perfect, but it was honest. It trembled like a violin finding its breath. Then it grew steadier, warmer. Junie's voice joined on the next line, their voices brushing past each other like feathers. Lyra came in last, sliding beneath them with a harmony so delicate it felt like a memory. Sawyer watched as their voices wove in and out, never competing, only supporting. When he reached the chorus, he let the melody breathe. The sound of his guitar was like wind through pine trees, raw, comforting, and constant. The audience, just moments before a restless sea of whispers, was now still. Some leaned forward, some sat with hands covering their mouths, and some wept. The final chorus rose, not in volume, but in grace. Maisie's voice soared. Junie held the steady center. Lyra whispered the undercurrent. 3 voices, 1 sound. Unpolished, but whole. The last note faded away like the silence after a snowfall. Then, stillness, and for a long, suspended moment, that was all there was. A woman in the second row, the grandmother of a boy on the football team, was the first to rise. Then a boy in the back, then a teacher, and then the entire auditorium was on its feet. The applause wasn't wild, it was reverent. Later, in the hallway, as students surrounded them with congratulations and looks of awe, a boy who had once laughed when Maisie flinched at the school bell approached her. He said nothing at first, then awkwardly held out a wrapped peppermint. "For you," he said. I'm sorry." Maisie looked at him, then took the candy and simply nodded. Back at the log cabin, Junie and Lyra drifted off to sleep early, curled up like commas in their blankets. Sawyer stood in the doorway of Maisie's room, just watching. She was sitting cross-legged on her bed, headphones on, listening to a recording of their performance on his phone. She looked up, pulling one earbud out. "Can we record tomorrow?" He blinked. "Record what?" Maisie tilted her head. "Our album," she said, and then she smiled. 3 days after the show, a photo of Junie, Lyra, and Maisie on stage appeared in the local paper under the headline, "3 Voices, 1 Moment, Talent Show Brings Unexpected Tears." It was a small article, but it meant everything. Sawyer cut it out and pinned it above the kitchen sink. Not for pride, but for proof. Proof that something pure had happened, and for once, the world hadn't looked away. The following week brought more attention than anyone expected. Ellis Warren, the school's music teacher and someone Sawyer had known in another lifetime, stopped by the cabin under the pretense of dropping off a thank you card. Her cheeks were flushed from the wind, but her eyes were warm. "I wanted to ask," she said, handing Sawyer a folded flyer. "Would the girls consider entering the county showcase in Lincoln next month?" She continued, "There are judges, a real stage, a real audience, even some talent scouts from the community arts centers." Sawyer hesitated. He glanced toward the living room, where Junie and Lyra were sprawled on the rug doing homework, and Maisie was quietly doodling in the margins of a music book. "Do they know you're asking?" Ellis smiled. "Not yet. I thought I'd talk to you first." He nodded. "I'll ask them." But deep inside, The familiar dread began to stir. The last performance had been a miracle, yes, but it had also been fragile. And this was bigger, riskier, more public. He'd seen what public attention did to young talent. It either lifted them up or it hollowed them out, and Sawyer had lost too much to risk watching anyone else be made hollow. That evening after dinner, Sawyer gathered the girls around the kitchen table and unfolded the flyer. Maisie traced her finger over the bold header at the top. Voices of Tomorrow, the All-State Youth Arts Showcase. Junie leaned in. So, we'd be competing? Not exactly, Sawyer said. It's more of a feature, a chance to be seen. By people who can help, Lyra asked. By people who can judge, Maisie said quietly. All eyes turned to her. Sawyer studied his daughter's face. She wasn't scared, just cautious. The scars of silence never really fade. They just change their shape. We don't have to do it, he said gently. What you did last week was more than anyone could ever ask for. Maisie didn't answer right away. Then, almost reluctantly, she whispered, but what if there's a girl out there like me, and she's waiting for someone else to sing first? Junie reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Sawyer let out a slow breath. Then I guess we better give her a song worth hearing. The girls worked harder than ever after that. They chose a piece that blended Maisie's gentle vocals with Junie's bright clarity and Lyra's subtle depth. Sawyer helped them arrange it for the guitar, adding a rhythm that built slowly, a quiet storm of emotion beneath the harmonies. They practiced in the garage most nights, the sound echoing strangely amidst old tools and cans of oil. Junie called it their echo chamber. Maisie started keeping a small journal, writing lyrics and doodling melodic fragments. She didn't share them yet, but Sawyer noticed she kept it close, tucked in her jacket pocket, like a secret she wasn't ready to tell. Everything seemed to be going right, until it wasn't. The day before the submission deadline, a call came from the principal's office. Sawyer took it in the kitchen, and though he tried to keep his voice low, words like policy, non-student, and regretfully still drifted into the living room where the three girls were sitting. When he hung up, the look on his face said everything. We can't go, can we? Junie asked bluntly, her voice trembling. Sawyer could only manage a heavy nod. Disappointment crashed down on the room. This time, Maisie didn't just observe. She felt her friend's pain as if it were her own. She saw Junie turn away to hide her frustrated tears and watched Lyra wrap an arm around her sister. And in that moment, Maisie made a decision. She walked over and picked up the guitar from the corner. So what? She said, her voice surprising the other three with its firmness. Junie and Lyra turned to look at her, bewildered. You sang when I couldn't, Maisie continued, looking them straight in the eye. You didn't need a competition to do that. Our music doesn't belong to any stage. It belongs to us. She sat on the floor, settling the guitar on her lap. We'll write a new song, one about this, about being told no and singing anyway. The idea was a small flame lit in the darkness. The tears were still there, but now they were mixed with creation. Junie started scribbling down her feelings. Lyra hummed a melody that was sad but hopeful. Maisie translated those emotions into chords. A song for the silent wasn't just written by Maisie. It was forged from the pain, resilience, and love of all three of them. When they recorded it together on Sawyer's old phone, it wasn't a substitute for the showcase. It was a victory far greater. In the end, there was no county showcase. There were no bigger stages, no louder applause, no more newspaper articles. The outside world had moved on to new stories. But in the little log cabin tucked at the edge of the pine woods, a true miracle had taken place. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Maisie found her father on the porch, silently watching the newly budding trees. On his lap was the envelope she had given him weeks ago, still unopened. She sat down beside him without a word. Is today the day? She asked quietly. Sawyer nodded slowly. He carefully opened the letter. Inside was a single page, written in Maisie's neat hand. Dearest Dad, I don't remember the first time you sang to me, but I remember the first time you stopped. It wasn't your fault. Grief is heavy. Silence is loud, and I was so afraid of making it worse that I became a part of it. But you waited, and when I finally sang again, you didn't rush. You didn't push. You just listened. That saved me. I don't know where this path will take me, or what songs I'll write next. But I know one thing. My voice exists because yours did, and that's the one I'll keep. Love, Maisie. Sawyer folded the letter, holding it in both hands like a sacred thing. He said nothing, but Maisie reached over, resting her head on his shoulder, and that was enough. That evening, the family gathered in the living room. No rehearsal, no stage lights, just Junie, Lyra, Maisie, and Sawyer with his old guitar. They sang softly, their faces lit by the fire's flickering glow and the warmth of memory. As their song ended, another melody began, familiar and sacred. The final line of the lullaby, her mother's unfinished song, was finally completed by a voice once lost to fear. Even in silence, I will sing for you,